City Council. Call the meeting to order. The first item would be the pledge to our flag. Councilmember Kulas, please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on our agenda this evening, well, let's do roll call first. So I guess we're minus Ruth, who is trying to call in. We'll see if we have any more luck with that. And I am not sure where Keith is, although I'm assuming we will see him sometimes before the meeting is over. First item on tonight's agenda is a consent item, which includes this evening's agenda, vouchers, and the minutes from the previous meeting.
Your Honor, I'd make a motion that we adopt a consent agenda, including this evening's agenda, vouchers, and the minutes from previous meetings.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Kulas, second by Councilmember Bailey to adopt this evening's consent items, which includes the agenda, vouchers, and the minutes from the previous meeting. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item on our agenda would be citizen comment. It'd be a time if any member of the audience would like to address the council on any item. I really don't see members of the public. Brian, you interested in? All right. Pete? You're okay? All right. We'll move on to presentations, and we have a proclamation regarding Diabetes Awareness Month. Who's got that?
I have it, Your Mayor.
All right. Councilmember Poyer.
So the proclamation for the Diabetes Awareness Month is diabetes is a debilitating disease that affects millions of Americans of all ages and all walks of life. And whereas Diabetes Month is the opportunity to raise awareness about risk factors, prevention, and treatment of this serious disease, and whereas the two most common forms of the disease that affects our citizens are type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, once known as juvenile diabetes, is usually diagnosed in children and young adults who are unable to produce insulin and require daily medication. Type 2 diabetes, the most common form of the disease, is often attributed to lifestyle risk factors and can be controlled by a modified diet, regular physical activity, and medication. And whereas citizens can take steps to control the disease and lower the risk of complications such as heart disease, stroke, and kidney disease by maintaining healthy eating and exercising habits and consulting with a doctor about diabetes testing. And whereas the City of Wenatchee and other area recreation providers conduct programs to encourage physical activity and healthy lifestyles. And whereas by working together to raise awareness, we can help identify problems early, manage them before they grow worse, help ensure more residents live longer, healthier lives, and bring hope to children and families living with this disease. Now therefore, Frank J. Kuntz, Mayor of the City of Wenatchee, do hereby proclaim November 2017 as Diabetes Awareness Month in Wenatchee, and hereby encourage all community members to learn more about the risk factors and symptoms associated with diabetes. In witness whereof, I hereby set my hand and cause the seal of the City of Wenatchee to be affixed on the second day of November 2017. Frank J. Kuntz, Mayor.
Thanks, Councilmember Poyer. And Tama was supposed to be here, but I don't see her. So, Anna, should we get a picture? Make sure we get it on Facebook with Mike and I?
I said Tama. Tama-lama.
Tammy will get it. Hi, Tammy.
It's all right.
It's
You like the mic? It's all right.
Yeah, we get it?
It's all right.
Look at her. I'll make sure that gets to Tama when she wants it. All right.
Good evening.
Good evening, Keith. So first item is regarding our contract with our hearing examiner. So I'll turn it over to Glenn DeVries. Glenn?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We have before you a request to amend the current contract we have with Andrew Kottkamp, the City of Wenatchee hearing examiner. He's been our hearing examiner for the last 10 years and been a hearing examiner in the Valley for about 20 years. We have not had a fee increase with Mr. Kottkamp in the last 10 years, even though we've had increases in our fee schedule. And he's working with the different jurisdictions he works with on updating his contracts to do a fee increase. The increase is proposed to go up to a base fee from a current fee of $450 for a typical application review, which is the majority which is at least 4 hours of work, about 4 hours of work, to a base fee of $600. And again, that takes most of our applications. And then if it would go over that 4 hours of work, the current contract has a $115 fee per hour for each hour of work over, and the proposed increase is to go to $150 per hour. Our fees with the hearing examiner are among the lowest he has, given that he can walk from his door down to our offices, and then also we provide him with decisions that the base components that he doesn't have to do as much work with. Even if he does make changes, the base components are there, so we retain a pretty good fee, and there's not the travel time. As far as Mr. Kotkamp's services, he has to be a land use attorney, which he is, and have that expertise. But even just as important also is the training he has in the Association of Washington Hearing Examiners. He's been a officer in that organization and has extensive training and participates in that. And the wealth of experience that he's done here, it shows in the hearing as he provides the public and the applicants a very fair and system where everybody feels they have the right to in a comfortable area, which can be a very uncomfortable situation for people coming and having to testify when they don't usually do that in their lives. He provides a very fair system for that, and does a very good job in his decisions, providing something that can be upheld. And in my experience with him, I've had decisions that went to a Superior Court, Appellate Court, and the Supreme Court, and the ones I've worked with him on, and they've never been overturned. And that's part of the value he provides to us. He provides a fair system for people to be heard, a fair system for applications, a predictable system for them. And then we know that we have codes adopted and policies that are being implemented fairly by the hearing examiner. So staff recommends that you consider authorizing the mayor.
Mark and I remember the good old days when all the land use came to the city council, and I think we were pushed pretty hard to get an attorney in the middle of that deal. So I think it's worked out really well for the city.
Good isn't quite the four-letter word I was thinking of.
Yeah. So, and I think he's done a great job for the city. So,
I do have a question, Glenn. Do you know, like, the flat fee is $450 now? Do you know roughly, does it usually get close to those 4 hours, or do you know?
Really depends on the application, but I'd say a good majority of the ones have been the flat fee.
Okay.
But some of the more complicated ones, then he does have to go over.
you really need to come to one of the hearings if you haven't, and just sit in the back and watch.
I'm just trying to see it in
Yeah.
your judgment, if it's like, hey, it ends up being 3.5 hours. He's earning his $450. Trust me. I mean, I don't know. Like,
He
it's
does.
not taking 10 minutes,
Yeah.
obviously.
No, it's
Right.
not. He always, one of the things I really respect is that he comes prepared with questions for staff, for the applicants. So he keeps the staff on its toes, and we know we have to be prepared and provide him the information. He's very thorough.
My observation is that the actual time in the hearing is like the tip of the iceberg. The bulk of the work is the research leading to, and then the decisions, if you read his decisions, are very well laid out in terms of his findings and conclusions that he reaches, and that takes quite a bit of time to draft that up and put that in a format that's easily understood and yet very defensible.
And I think the other thing, from a legality standpoint, we are way better protected to have a hearing examiner in the middle of that than having us, because those become quasi judicial hearings. Then did you talk to your neighbor? Well, then you have to excuse it really does change the process, makes it way more defendable, and I think it's worth the new pay grade of $600. I think that's more than reasonable for what we get.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 10 years. That's quite a lengthy time, and we have had a number of those kinds of things where long times between incremental changes. So Sounds kind of like a lot, but when you sort of think about it over a period of 10 years, it's really not that big of a jump.
No.
I would concur, having been on the planning commission and chairing that board many years ago, sending things up to the city council was like sending, like the Wild West. And, you kind of really never knew.
Never knew, no.
Who was going to be the fastest draw,
Yeah.
But this certainly brings an enormous amount of stability to the process and keeps us out of jail, I think.
Yeah.
You touched on it once, but you kind of, in the question I asked earlier, you'd mentioned that he's more than just our hearing examiner. He's more of a regional. I think that's
Yes.
really important because
Does
now
everybody.
he's considering not just the city of Wenatchee, he's considering the county, he's considering
does.
our region, how that fits in. I think that's very important.
Blount County, Douglas County, he does some work.
Almost
in-
Eastern Washington.
Yeah, a
Cass
lot of
County,
Eastern
Ellensburg,
Washington.
yeah,
He's,
It's very tough to find people with that qualification set. There's competition on the west side, but we're just fortunate that we have someone so qualified here and he's reasonable.
Glenn, on average, how many cases go up to him a year? 2, 3?
Oh, no, we usually have 1 to 2 per month.
I was gonna say 10 or 12, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he does all the conditional use permits, he does all the
Okay.
subdivisions, anything bigger than a short plat, I think he does, so.
Does appeals also of administrative decisions. Serves in a
Well, Your Honor, with all that said, I'll make a motion for the city council to authorize the mayor to sign an ongoing updated professional services contract with Andrew L. Kottkamp for the city of Wenatchee hearing examiner position.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Huffaker, second by Councilmember Harold to authorize the mayor to sign an updated professional services contract with Andy Kottkamp for a hearing examiner for the city of Wenatchee. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Glenn.
In January, I'd love to have him maybe come and introduce himself and
Yeah, why don't you, as part of the,
do his
when
review.
we usually have all of the committee work come up and spend some time, have Andy come up and give us a little 5 minutes on
Great.
what's going
You
on.
always get the annual report in written
Yeah,
form,
yeah,
and
it's
very-
always very good.
really informative, but yeah, it'd be nice to.
And if it's okay with the council, I'd like to give him like a recognition, thank you, something of that nature.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Thank you.
For a reduction in his fee, we'll do that. All right, so we have 3 public hearing items this evening. So for public hearings, we'll first hear from our staff, then we'll turn it over to the public, our staff, and then we'll turn it over to the public, and then back over to the council for any decision they may be willing to take. The first is regarding our subdivision standards. Glenn?
Good evening again. Before you, we have a ordinance which would provide for an interim control. And currently, what a lot of jurisdictions have done is have put together a separate road standard section in their code, and these typically include a provision where the Public Works Department has the ability to consider alternatives when they're looking at street designs. And this is really would be really beneficial for the city of Wenatchee. It's not, the land that we're developing now isn't getting any easier. It's sometimes it's more the more challenging sites. Obviously, we have housing challenges in the valley, and there are new technologies and innovative provisions that are coming up all the time. And it's really right now in our code, if there are any changes to our street standards as far as a difference, it has to go to the hearing examiner. And it doesn't provide the applicant much predictability as they're putting together their plans. And the idea is to put out a alternative street standards section where the applicant's engineer can submit a proposed alternative, and that there's certain benchmarks they have to meet to make sure that public health, safe, life-D, standard engineering principles, those types of things, fire code, that those are met. And then it can be evaluated by the Public Works Department. And the city of East Wenatchee, Douglas County, when they updated and did a consolidated road standard section, they incorporated that same section. So this would provide us that tool that we don't have currently, to evaluate those sites, and we could even do it before they submitted a application. They have that certainty knowing before they go to the hearing examiner on a plat, that that a concept can be considered in their development. Anything else you'd like to add, Matt?
Yeah, so currently there's a variance criteria that has to be met before staff can recommend that there's any variation from that standard to the hearings examiner. So, this process will allow the applicant to use sound engineering judgment, and they'll have to provide proof of what their engineering standards that they follow to determine the design. And then that can be evaluated and recommended without having to, meet these strict variances that our code currently requires. Like cost is not one of the variance reasons. So if it's costs $1 million to do this and to make it compliant with the code, well, we have to say you have to do that. And
Staff is just stuck. We got a couple subdivisions that are, we want housing, and that just isn't going to make any sense if we don't get some flexibility to our staff, because they don't even have permission in the code to say, well, let's just only require this or that or something less than full street standard. And if we're just not going to get any more lots to build if we can't figure out other ways. They're not perfect, but we need to give staff some flexibility to try to get, we certainly want full street standard for every one of them. That's our goal. But if it's that or not having the housing development, then we got to really think about our need for housing and how to get through it. So I know the Public Works Committee, we've talked a couple different times about different, developments and trying to get them to the finish line. And this will hopefully get one or two to the finish line. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's, we'll still,
Yeah, well,
we'll still have
one
a
or two that aren't
requirement
getting done now, yeah.
for the developments, and like Glenn said, health, life, safety.
I think the other part of it too is that when you go out and you do your comprehensive plan and you're out talking to the public about what they'd like to see in their neighborhood development standards, oftentimes your comp plan precedes the code. Code takes time to write and get updated. So the intent of where your community would like to go. Right now, the complexion is developing neighborhoods that are actually having more of an older feel, perhaps narrower streets, those sorts of treatments. And so this gives our staff the ability to work within the confines of our comprehensive plan while our code catches up.
Besides subdivision, this is like for those flag lots and things like that too, or what am I, I don't understand?
It could. We also adopted some specific standards in June that really help those flag lots out by being able to accommodate them with easements. But it could have, there could be a
There's a
scenario
road component of
if
it.
there's a road component that just doesn't make sense. This could help.
All right, any questions for staff?
Yeah, I have a couple quick things here. Glenn, could you give me a quick definition of the term intern control? I'm not,
Sure.
I think I understand where we're going with this, but I want to understand what that term means.
So we would have a 6-month period to go through the planning commission, and the planning commission would evaluate the change to the code, and put a recommendation to you on this matter for your consideration for so you could consider a final change to the code on this matter.
So if we adopt it this evening, does the interim code then become in effect?
It goes into effect, and people could be vested under that code component after they submit a complete application. I know we have one party that's going to waive their vesting so they can be, if this is adopted, so they can be subject to it.
Okay.
But then we would have time for the planning commission to make a recommendation for you on this matter, so you could consider a
More
permanent
fix.
change.
Okay.
Okay, so the basic thing, though, is what we're saying is for the next 6 months, you will have the ability to make these or consider these alternative
Correct.
Based on
differential
sound
standards
engineering
kind of things,
judgment, yeah.
until such time as, at the end of 6 months, hopefully we'll have actual code that will come to us. But in the interim, that's where I was getting with the definition of the term. In the interim, we will have the authority to make those decisions.
Correct.
Make those adjustments. Okay. I guess the thing that I am most concerned with in this, and this is not disparaging either of you in terms of your skills and your abilities, but I get a little nervous when we start talking about changing street standards and those kinds of things. We have, I think we've done in recent years pretty good job. In years past, we haven't done a very good job of maintaining those. There's a lot of subdivisions where substandard streets were allowed in and those kinds of things. So that's my underlying sense here, is that I'm a little nervous about.
Checks and balances. I mean,
Well, that's what checks and balances,
yeah.
just that when we start making all the, these exceptions, how, yes, good standards, good engineering, all those kinds of things, but, and that's my concern.
Would it be good if he gave us an example of something?
And
we
that
would
was my next
consider?
thing, is can you give me an example of,
That was gonna be my question, is.
yeah.
Yeah, so I guess, well, the conversation we've had so far, it's not really the standards as in like pavement thickness or things like that, the structural stuff. It's more of geometrics. So radiuses for corners in low volume subdivision, residential streets.
But like Pine Shadow on the,
Yeah, with sidewalk, roadway width stuff. I mean, it's not the the actual, like, I know, like in 2004 or 5 we had some subdivisions that were built with really no base and the roads fell apart right away.
Yeah.
And that's not really where we're going. It's more just offering more flexibility for with maybe some natural traffic calming type measures. Because right now our standards are 100-foot radius for a curve, and things like that. So more flexibility there, I guess.
we had one development that had a very short duration slope that would exceed our slope, but
Oh, yeah.
either the fire marshal or engineering staff had a concern on it. But the direct way our code read, it would have had gone to the hearing examiner for a variance.
Yeah, they wanted 12%
Yeah, so that's-
slope, and we can
yeah.
only go up to 10.
Yeah,
So
so our
really,
fire code says 10% slope. I got a subdivision that's got a 10% slope and the end goes to 12%, right? You would want those guys to go out and look and say, does it make sense? And under our current code, go to the hearing examiner. We don't have the authority to make that call, right? And that's so that they're hamstrung, and so that just doesn't happen, right? Or sometimes we'll end up with these two streets that need to be, both of them have to be the full city standard, right? Well, if that's the case, you're not gonna get 60 lots because the cost to do. So force one, get right away on the other, maybe a different sort of a treatment for sidewalks or something. Still safe, but not full curb sidewalk, all of this stuff.
I guess I'm comfortable with what we're talking about. What I'm not comfortable with is when we start heading that direction a little bit, only because of we have actual experience here in the city where things have not worked out under whatever best practices you want to call it, because let's face it, that's debatable. I'm thinking of one instance, and it has more to do with the construction of a development that was approved about, let's just say 30 years ago, and about every 10 years when their street, it was private roads, so they got less of a standard, and about every 10 years when they need to repair their streets, they're asking the city to take over their streets because they don't want to assess themselves for it. And I don't really feel that it's up to the taxpayers to do that. In another instance, in an affordable housing development, the sidewalks ended up being so narrow that there's no way that you could ever claim that they meet ADA standards. And they actually, they're useless. I mean, they serve no purpose. Their curb cuts are so steep that anyone could trip and fall on them. They're narrow. That's the sort of thing, when we're talking about affordability, we're talking about long-term affordability or long-term usability. I'm into narrowing streets. I'm into the low-impact development stuff we can do. I'm not into saying that, we're going to forget multimodal travel and we're going to put in streets. We're going to waive sidewalks. We're not going to have appropriate curb gutter sections for drainage. That's the stuff that I think when the city 30 years from now, when the people who do the development are long gone and the city's 30 years from now having to do those maintenance, those are the things that concern me, that long-term look at what's our infrastructure, how's our infrastructure going to hold together when the next generations of councils are trying to balance budgets to keep those things up.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. But when I sit there and look at our housing issues, and I know they got some that just won't happen, right? Or they'll get vested and they'll wait 7, 8, 9 years for things to change before they go. And that's their right, and I get it. And it's not our job to cave, but it's also our job to figure out, is there something that's in the middle that might work?
And when I'm driving up and down, let's say Stevens Street or Castle Rock Street, and elementary school students are walking to school in the street because there's no sidewalk on either side,
Yep.
I defy anyone to tell me that that's a good engineering practice.
Yeah,
It's not.
no. And most of that was probably done in the county, probably some in the city before we had
It's-
standards.
The ones I'm referring to are all city,
Are they? Yeah.
you know.
So we can wait 6 months until something's put together and then look at it?
Well, I don't know, I assume that somebody's pushing the button to come
Yeah,
up with
so
there's a
the-
development
yeah.
there that wants to vest under this, and that's
So,
why it's brought
yeah,
to us.
That's the downside is if you pass it tonight, right? When someone walks in tomorrow with an application that doesn't, whatever, let's say the 10 or 12% fire grade, right? And if your staff says it's okay, they're vested, nothing you can do about it, right? They're vested under the current adoption if you guys pass it, right? If you say, no, we're not ready yet, staff go spend some time working on it, run it through the planning commission and back up, then our current law stays the same, and they'll have to wait to see in 6 months whether we change it or don't change it. I don't know that it's gonna specifically, mostly in these sort of documents, they're not gonna give you suggestions and say, well, if you go from 10 to 12, then we'll accept it. So at the end of the day, it's gonna be the judgment of your staff at some point to say, hey, are we willing to try to get something here? No, it's just the right spot.
And I'm
Yeah.
comfortable with this. And what I'm not comfortable with is someone coming in and saying, I can provide affordable housing if you let me not put sidewalks in at all.
Right.
I'm not comfortable with
Yeah,
that.
no.
I'm not comfortable with that.
And I don't think we're seeing anyone who's not willing to put sidewalks.
And I don't mean
Yeah,
the 2.5-foot wide sidewalks that are off of Methouse Street.
Right.
I mean sidewalks.
yeah.
So then it comes back to what Jim said as far as judgment. So it's not personal. It's like, how are you guys going to determine this? Maybe that's the question to you.
So yeah, a lot of it's going to be, we're going to try to make the applicant prove to us how it meets, the engineering standards. There's AASHTO standards, there's DOT standards. I guess that's at least my goal, is to let them prove to us that it meets, the ADA standards,
And that part's fine, but it's also the adopted city policy. How does it meet the adopted city policy? Not just providing affordable housing, but mobility for all of our residents and our interconnectivity. And so it's not just AASHTO and the WashDOT design manual, it's all this body of policy that this council has adopted to make the community complete.
That's part of the, sort of our partnership in reviewing it is I'd be looking at the policy component of the plans, how we're providing the pedestrian infrastructure, those components that are identified in the plan, but then also impacts under SEPA, the State Environmental Policy Act, are in providing an alternative design substantively, can you show that, these impacts, a lot of which are, you have policy direction on in your comprehensive plan, how are those tied in when we're evaluating those alternatives?
And this is the last thing I'm going to say on this, but my other example, unlike 2 weeks ago when we were hearing about how fast folks were driving on Councilmember Bailey's street because it's wide, my father's property is 2 streets over, and it's a 30-foot wide street. And it's absolutely adequate for a residential street, in all honesty. Even the day that, unfortunately, my mom's car caught on fire, it was winter, and the fire truck was able to get up there. Now, sure, people couldn't go by. 30 feet worked. 36 doesn't. 36 is a wide street for a residential street. So those are the things that I think that we've addressed in our plan about deviations we'd like you to be able to explore with people. It's just not the complete dismantling of everything, just because someone says, I think this is a good idea. So that's enough. People can't go 50 miles, well, they have. It didn't work out too well.
All right, any other discussion for the
My
staff folks?
last question is, are you comfortable taking that role and being that person for 6 months that's going to be able to say yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we rely, there's a professional that's gonna submit their recommendation to us, and being able to review that, I mean, I think,
Okay.
you know,
So just procedurally, this is a public hearing.
Yep.
So we don't have to have a hearing within 60 days because we are setting findings here, is that?
That's correct.
Okay. One-stop shopping, so to speak.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the way we set it up. We're
like
making findings tonight.
I like that.
All right, anybody from the public wish to address the council on this matter? Seeing no takers, I will turn it over to the council for their action, if any.
Your Honor, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance number 2017-24, adopting an interim official control relating to subdivision design standards by providing an alternative street design where flexibility would be beneficial yet comply with sound engineering principles.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Huffaker, second by Councilmember Markart to adopt ordinance 2017-24, adopting an interim official control relating to subdivision design. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Stormwater code revisions. Matt, Jessica. Jessica, nice to see you tonight.
Nice to see you all. Good evening.
Not that it's not nice to see Matt, but
yeah.
we see him more often than we see you. Yeah.
Yeah, they probably should have got right. Maybe they're trying to avoid that.
Well, good evening. On this rainy night, we have some stormwater code for you to consider. Appropriately timed.
Set this up.
Yeah.
You hope it's all working out there.
Yeah.
Let's take a tour.
So tonight's code revisions are with regards to construction, post-construction section of the code, and we put together a quick presentation just to kind of give you an overview of why we're doing that, what we're doing, some of the background information, and then we can talk more about the code changes. So why are we updating the code right now? Mostly this is being driven by our municipal stormwater permit, which tells us that we need to update our construction, post-construction code by the end of the year. So we do have a deadline of 12/31/2017 by the code. We're also looking at taking this opportunity to provide some clarification. We've had a lot of questions or some confusing parts of the code, hoping to correct that. We're also hoping to provide more consistency with our other stormwater partners, Chelan County, Douglas County, and East Wenatchee, where that's appropriate. So these are kind of the areas that we'll cover, and all of the changes basically fit into these three categories. One thing to note is that there was a pretty big stormwater ruling by the Supreme Court that happened last December. These regulations used to be treated as development regulations, so they would go through the same process as any other development regulations for review, both locally and at the state and through the Planning Commission. But last December, the Supreme Court ruled that local stormwater regulations under the permit are not land use control. So they're not under the state statutory vested rights protection. So they're just regulations. And the goal of these regulations, of course, is to prevent pollution of stormwater.
So I guess the big thing there is that if somebody comes in for say they do their subdivision and they don't fully build it out under the existing permit and this code changes, that now the stuff they're doing after this is adopted, then they would have to follow the new rules. Yeah.
The one thing that Ecology did, though, was to include a sort of vesting in the permit requirements. So as you'll see here, the applicability of this code is that if for anything after December 31st, And if you don't start construction within 5 years, then these new regulations apply. But for subdivisions that have already submitted applications, have been approved, started construction, they're meeting these requirements, then the new rules won't apply. So this is a form of vesting that they added into the permit.
Disregard what I just said.
Yeah, well,
Go,
but
yeah.
you're right. There are applications that will not be vested if they don't meet these requirements. This, again, we have adopted minimum requirements based on the permit. So this only applies to projects that disturb greater than an acre, which in the city, you know, they're a little bit far between these. There's not every day. There's lots of projects under an acre happening. And then also, if the project during construction disturbs over an acre, then these requirements get triggered. So mostly talking about larger subdivisions and larger redevelopment projects. The other note is Ecology has updated some of their definitions, and just as a note, start of construction is not just removing native soils and leaving, you know, dirt. You actually have to start building some infrastructure to be considered a start of construction. So when we mention this in the code, that's what we're referring to, are those Department of Ecology definitions. So the code changes to comply with the permit is, again, we updated some definitions to be consistent with our state permit. The other key change is that we will now require on-site retention of, at a minimum, the 10-year, 24-hour rainfall event. Locally, Chelan County requires retention of the 25-year event, and East Wenatchee Douglas County require the 100-year event. So this is our first step into starting to retain some of that stormwater on site, which EPA's perspective and Ecology's perspective is that if the stormwater doesn't leave the site, it doesn't have the opportunity to pick up pollutants that end up in the river. So the more that you can keep that water getting back into the ground like it naturally would before development is beneficial, not for local groundwater, it's beneficial for the river. So the goal of all this low impact development and this requirement is you keep the water on the site where it lands. Don't let it run off into the road where it has that opportunity to pick up garbage and sediment and all kinds of things.
So this is quite a bit more, I would call, restrictive than other
Yes.
places?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is the minimum that our permit will let us do. So like Jessica said, Douglas County and East Wenatchee have gone a little bit above.
Okay.
But this is
This
the
is less.
minimum that
Yes.
Ecology will let us do.
This is for new and remodeling.
New and redevelopment disturbing greater than an acre.
Okay.
Or part of a common plan of development that's over
So
an acre.
Jessica's picture is kind of that's People's Bank there.
Yeah, so this is a great local example. People's Bank voluntarily did low impact development and retained all of their stormwater on site.
Okay.
Drive by, check it out, especially when it's raining. You won't see any water leaving the site. They have permeable pavement. You can see the pavers that they put down rather than just doing a concrete, patio. They did the pavers that the stormwater can drain down through. Lots of nice landscaping. So these are some of the ideas about when we talk about retaining water on site. We're talking about swales. We're talking about permeable pavement, pavers. You'll see a lot of these things that the city has also worked on. Riverside Drive, Polly Street are all great examples of low impact development as well.
What about the parking lot itself? Is it?
It is. It's all pervious. So the water just drains right down through the asphalt, it's permeable asphalt.
Yeah, we were worried that it might plug up due to sand in the winter, but
Or freezing in the winter is what I was
yeah,
worried
they
about.
haven't had to put any sand out because they don't get any ice because it doesn't ever have water on it. Their gravel base goes far enough below the frost depth that it
Just goes.
goes.
They've actually found through studies in colder climates like New Hampshire that these permeable pavements actually reduce the amount of snow and ice accumulation. They don't have to do as much snow and ice removal because of that. The water doesn't sit on the surface and freeze. It tends to just go right down into the infiltration area. The other benefit is that it takes a really long time, even without any maintenance, for these to really get silted up to a point where they fail. So they found that as far as costs of installation versus the long-term O&M, the permeable pavement, even in environments where you get frost and snow, is actually a viable option. It was always a concern before is that it may not work here, but
The city of East Wenatchee did concrete.
yeah. Yes, I think it may be a combination of,
Yeah, the new lot on
Yeah.
on
Downtown
downtown
Parkway.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it's fun to take water and dump it on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go.
So
good
check
right
out
there.
People's Bank. They've been there since 2013. 2014 is when they constructed that, so it's been out there for a while.
Excellent.
So the code changes for clarification. So we've listened to what people have told us when they've come in and applied. There's a confusion between the state's construction stormwater program and the city's construction program. So the city is required to have this construction stormwater management program by our permit. And there's a lot of the same requirements as what the state has for their construction stormwater program. So that's a huge source of confusion. The state offers an erosivity waiver, and previously this was not addressed in our code, but we had a lot of requests for it. And so when we looked at what we were allowed under our permit, we decided this was a good thing to add in. So this is a benefit to applicants who are applying for erosivity waiver through the state construction stormwater program. They can now apply for an erosivity waiver through the city's construction stormwater program. So it gives them an opportunity to reduce the number of submittals that are required on applications that meet the criteria in our permit. We also looked at our code and how clear it was for people to be able to understand of how do you get through this process, what are we looking for when you submit your stormwater site plan. And we did some reorganization, so you might see a lot of red in this document, but it's not so much about changes we've made as we've reorganized sections so that hopefully it's more clear. If you're looking for specific information, you hopefully should be able to find it and it's more clearly written. We also added some language to explain what it is we're looking for when you submit your stormwater site plan to hopefully cut down on when you come in and you apply, we get all the right information the first time around in that stormwater site plan. And these are some more examples of low impact development. These happen to both be at the college. One is the new parking lot at the art building where the parking lot water runs right into this grassy area. It's a swale with infiltration. There's a dry well in the middle there. And then another is a parking lot that just runs into a landscaped area. So the code changes for consistency. This last fall, the Department of Ecology has been working on updating the Eastern Washington Stormwater Management Manual. This is the design standards for post-construction or those stormwater facilities that'll be there after construction. It also includes information on what you need to do during construction to protect stormwater. And one of the comments that we got from the stakeholders group that we held was that we need to be more consistent in the valley, that they didn't like that everybody had things worded differently or different requirements. And so one of the things that we looked at was, okay, so who's our closest partner, Chelan County? What do they say about what are they requiring for their stormwater site plan? And can we make our language look more like theirs so that, developers and applicants don't have to try and figure out, is the city talking about the same thing as the county? It's more consistent. And we also updated the enforcement section of this to be consistent with our water and sewer codes. So we're basically using the same process of education first, followed by, increasing enforcement action.
So that erosivity waiver, just to go back on that.
Oh.
So that's just, that's more to like the sites that don't have a discharge. So if they're a site that, it's pretty much self-contained, then they would qualify for that and not have to go through all the stormwater requirements.
Yeah, they
If
don't
there
have
was
to
low
submit.
risk to pollution from that site.
Correct. Yep. And this picture is our 5th Street outfall. This was taken, the outfall is roughly in the middle of the photo there. That takes a pretty big basin up 5th, Orchard, and lots of stormwater comes out of that. And that's right there at the base of 5th Street. So next steps. So if you choose to move forward with the code changes that we're presenting tonight, some things that staff will be working on between now and December 31st is there'll be record keeping associated with that local erosivity waiver that we'll be developing. The permit requires that we have folks sign an actual waiver, and that language is provided in the permit. So we'll be putting that together. We'll also be working on getting some information for applicants on the code changes. Some of this information has already gone out. Since we didn't go through the planning commission and that process, since it's no longer development regulations, we did make an effort to present this to stakeholders. So the developers, engineering committee, we sent them specifically copies of this draft code in early October and asked them to give us feedback, tell us what you think. We took feedback at some of these meetings where we talked about local construction stormwater regulations. And then this was also posted on our website for the last month to try and solicit feedback on on these. And then staff will be updating our permits in SmartGov to reflect these changes in the code. And then also working with the Planning Commission on low-impact development options and standard details for improvements located in the right-of-way. So our goal is really to kind of help anyone that comes in to work through these changes and get them through the process.
Great.
So you said you sent it out for feedback. What kind of feedback did you get?
None.
None. This is stormwater.
Stormwater is such an exciting subject, Linda.
I love stormwater, but hey.
Okay, no questions for staff. I'll turn it over to any member of the audience or the public that would like to address the council. Seeing no takers, I will turn it over to the council for their action, if any.
If we were in the Puget Sound Basin, there would have been lots of comments.
Oh, yeah, I know. I used to live there. Your Honor, I move to adopt ordinance number 2017-22, amending chapter 12.10 of the Wenatchee City Code related to construction and post-construction stormwater.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Harold, second by Councilmember Poyer to adopt ordinance 2017-22, amending chapter 12.10 of the Wenatchee Code related to stormwater. Discussion.
I enjoy when I hear words, ease of business, even though you didn't say the word ease of business, I love that. To make it easier, we get more people here, it's more understanding, only have to file one form instead of two. So that's always impressive when I see things like that.
Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Matt.
Yes, thank you.
Property tax levy, Mr. Posenjack.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I have ordinance 2017-25 and resolution 2017-55 related to 2018 property tax levies. I'll start with ordinance 2017-25 that authorizes an increase in the regular property tax levy. 2017's regular levy amount was $3,220,000. When if you take the 1% that you're allowed to take on top of that by RCW, that adds another $32,200. And then the assessor has estimated new construction at $23,000. The effect of new annexations over the past year is close to $50,000. And then there's some refunds that are made throughout the year that shouldn't have been assessed. I won't get into the details by the assessor, and so then we can recover those refunds as well. So that brings us all the way up to the $3,343,481. And overall, when you include the new construction, annexations, and refunds, and the 1% increase, that's 3.8% more than what our 2017 levy was. And once again, 100% of general property tax will be transferred to the streets. So this comes into the general fund and goes right out to streets.
So explain the 3.8%.
The 3.8 is the 1% increase.
Please, sorry.
Oh, pardon?
Please.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. The where the rest of the above the 1% increase, that other 2.8% increase is coming from new construction. So those are new valuations that are coming onto the rolls. Those aren't. It's not
New properties.
It's new properties. It's not increasing an existing property's taxes. That's a new property that's coming in. Same thing with the annexation. Those are new properties coming in. Basically, we're getting the taxes that used to go to the county. So that's where that shift is. Relatively, it shouldn't be any new taxes on the individual, and then a little bit from the refunds. So you're getting 2.8% from basically new.
So what's interesting is we're taking statutorily what we can.
Mm-hmm.
Assessed valuations are going up, so our levy rate's dropping.
Yes.
Right. So we're now at $1.11.
And that's where some of my confusion comes in. And I
Let me see if I can
called Brad earlier and asked him if he could give us some kind of an explanation there, because it seems to me if our valuation keeps going up, which is, we pay tax on that valuation of our property, and we're increasing by 1%, How is it that it's going down?
It's not 1% of the property values, it's 1% of our last levy amount. So
Yeah.
as values go up, we're not staying up with it.
Right.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And this all started with an initiative 20 years ago.
I think the way to think about it, Keith, is this 3.3 number is,
He said he was going to come up with the
Oh, look
best
at
way
that.
to describe it.
I talked to the assessor's office this evening before I came here, and they've had this question hundreds of
Million
times.
times, yeah.
So they've got an example in their annual report that they do that shows a really very simplified example. So if our city budget was only $1,000 and we only had four property taxpayers and they all had the same $100,000 valuation, they would each pay $250 in taxes. So you've got your total assessed valuation at $400,000. That rate per thousand is $2.50. The city is only gonna collect $1,000. So then the housing market goes crazy. Everybody's assessed valuations double up to $200,000. The city budget is still $1,000. So the rate per thousand cuts in half down to $1.25. Assessed valuations shoot through the roof. Your total assessed valuations doubled to $800,000. However, each taxpayer still only pays $250. So even though the valuations doubled, everybody's paying the same thing. Where it starts getting different is in the third instance, where you see the first person to the left, their assessed valuation went down. The person on the right, their assessed valuation went up. The other two remained unchanged.
Right, so they would pay different.
So now the taxes are getting shifted around. We still have a total assessed valuation of $800,000. The rate per thousand is still $1.25, and the city is still only collecting $1,000. So that $1,000 is just getting pushed around among our tax base.
the way I look at it is that 3.3 million is fixed, and it's just getting divided up by whatever the value is. It just happens to be 3 billion this year. It could have been 2.6 billion the year before. So it's just the way they're dividing it. But as your assessed valuation goes up, your dollar per thousand obviously drops, even though this number is increasing.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I guarantee you 99% of the city.
Here's
I
what you
understand
hear.
it.
Yep.
Yeah.
My valuations went up and my taxes went up. That's exactly right. And they blame it all on the valuation. And the valuation has very little to do with it.
Okay.
Besides
part
the
of the
city
math.
getting the same amount of money, is the taxpayer paying more?
If they are, it's not going to us.
Okay, so is this a Tim Iman, and then this is something with Tim Iman, and then
I believe the 1%.
The 1%.
Then the government
1%,
came in
yeah.
and,
1% limit.
yeah, and then, okay, all right.
And they do kick around this idea of having the legislature change it to allow it to go to some sort of cost of living increase, to go from 1% to 2.9 or whatever. There's talk in Olympia about adjusting that, but right now we just live with the 1% plus new construction plus annexations.
And so if construction completely stopped and annexations completely stopped, we would be limited to that 1%.
Right.
However, since we have new construction and the annexations, it ends up effectively being more than that to our budget. But to the people paying taxes, it shouldn't go up more than 1% on average. Some neighborhoods their valuations will go up quicker than others, and so some of that 3.3 million may get shifted around between people, but we're only going to collect the 1% more.
That's the mystery part of it, is how your valuation can go up, but it doesn't affect your tax. So
Yep.
I appreciate you taking the time to research that.
Yeah, and the assessor's office has changed the way they do things. Several years ago, I remember when they would do a once every 3 year evaluation. And so they would evaluate one area 1 year, and then they would evaluate another area another year. And so the year that they evaluated Chelan, and prices were just skyrocketing. Chelan's their taxes went crazy, and my taxes actually dropped. So I saw my taxes go down because we had the same pot of money that now just everybody in Chelan was getting paid for it.
fair.
Yeah. But then the next year they valued my property, and now mine went up. My property taxes went way up, and in Chelan, theirs went down a tiny bit. And so since then, the assessor's office has moved to a some sort of annual
Annual
evaluation process where
I missed
they
that.
just they kind of try to even that out a little bit. So we shouldn't see it as bad as we have in the past.
And you should know that the city does have the ability to raise that levy amount, but you have to put it to a public vote to raise
Unless we
your.
have bank capacity, which
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, the city does have 2 million of bank capacity, so the city could actually levy up to, I think it was 5.4 million, which would shock everybody.
Yeah.
What's the average increase for the citizen of Wenatchee? I mean, do you have any, I don't know, I'm just trying to get something in my head when I get the call.
3.8%. It depends on your
Well,
value of your property.
Well, but it's not.
It should be 1%.
3.8 is
1%.
in total revenue.
Right.
Yeah, for us, it's 3.8 in total revenue. For the average taxpayer, it should be 1% on the city's,
On the city's
as far as the
portion.
city.
City's
If,
portion.
if another jurisdiction is
Like
doing,
Chelan County.
yeah, if Chelan County is doing a different kind of increase or doing assessments, that's where you often see them.
And then it'll be interesting this year with the school property tax levy that is shifting based on the state legislative action that they took to fund McCleary. So that all has to get worked out through the system. So there may be a lot
That's
of confusion.
probably going to cause a bigger increase than anything.
And what, the fire district also
Right.
has a voters pass a
gonna-
levy, so that's going to make it go up.
Yeah.
But as far as the city goes, on the average city resident, on average, it shouldn't go up more than 1% for them. For the cities,
For the city's part of it.
for the city's portion, what they're paying to the city.
Yeah.
Like most people do, and they don't often look at the
Yep.
the sheet
The
where
breakdown.
Where it all
all the different
goes.
taxing agencies are broke out there. They
Not
just
at
look at the they look at the bill and it's our fault, you know. or-
Darn city.
So why don't we go ahead and do the bond one next, and then we'll turn it over
Okay.
to public comment, and then we can deal with those two ordinances separately.
So the next one is Resolution 2017-55, which authorizes additional voter-approved property taxes to meet our debt service payment for the police station construction bonds that were issued in December 2001. So the levy, the 2018 levy would be $327,827. And that would provide what we need to make our payment on our 2018 bonds. Basically, that's exactly what it would cost us. And those bonds should be paid off in 2021. And so we request that the city council approve ordinance 2017-25, authorizing an increase in the regular property tax levy, and approve resolution 2017-55, requesting the assessor to collect sufficient funds to address debt service requirements.
And this one is much easier because it was citizen approved.
Yep.
We're just doing what the citizens asked us to do. All right, any other questions of Brad? If not, I will turn it over to any members of the public that wish to address the council on our property tax assessment for 2018. Seeing no takers, I will turn it over to the council for their action.
Your Honor, I make a motion that we adopt ordinance number 2017-25, authorizing an increase in the regular property tax levy to be collected in the 2018 tax year.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Kulas, second by Councilmember Harold, to adopt ordinance number 2017-25, authorizing an increase in the regular property tax levy for 2018. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Your Honor, I would move that we adopt resolution number 2017-55, requesting the Chelan County Assessor to collect sufficient funds to address debt service requirements of a voter-approved bond levy.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Bailey, second by Councilmember Markart, to adopt resolution 2017-55, requesting the Chelan County Assessor to collect sufficient funds to address the debt service requirements for the voter-approved bond levy for our police station. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That concludes our public hearing on the three items. So the next on our agenda today is a quick update on the 2018 budget, which is required under our budget calendar, and then first look at the 2017 amendment, which is also required under our budget calendar. So no adoptions here, just review. Brad?
All right. Well, last time I was before the whole council, we looked at, that was on the 12th of October. And so I've got an update with a few minor updates that we've made since then that have gone before the finance committee. So if you've got the 2018 preliminary budget summary document in front of you, there's that 2018 preliminary at 11.217 column shows where we currently are at. So if you look at the first part, we've got the total general fund revenues and expenses, and the net income is just shy of losing $800,000 is how we're budgeted for. Most of this, well, all of that $800,000 difference are one-time expenses, and just knowing how we typically conservatively budget, I fully expect that even though our budget is built to lose $800,000, we're always conservative on expenses and conservative on our revenues, and so we'll probably end up breaking about even for 2018. If you look at the recurring revenues right below it, they are basically break even, and that is what we want to see in our recurring revenues and expenditures. You can see the changes, the changes column since 1012. The change there is related to an estimated property tax into what was actually adopted tonight. So the 43,000 coming in and going out is just a increase to the property tax once we adopted the actual levy tonight, and it comes in and goes right out to the streets. If you look below on non-recurring portion of the general fund, the changes on that since the last time we looked at it are 540,000, and most of that 540,000 is related to projects that were approved for 2017 that aren't going to get done, and so they were rolled into the 2018 budget, and so we just got those in there. And some of those things include 350,000 in public works projects such as South Yard building, the Apple Capitol sign, cemetery expansion, juniper removal, skyline cameras. It also has a couple the new projects that are in there were $20,000 approved for the Pioneer locker rooms, $50,000 to design some HVAC upgrades to the police building, and then $16,000 in HVAC replacement and other repairs at the Carnegie building. So if you really want to get into the details, we can chat later probably, unless you really want to get into it. Then under the all other funds, there's significant changes since the last time we looked at that. The 33 million in expenditures and revenues, and those are the capital projects that are being budgeted for 2018. If you haven't noticed, the city's taking on some big projects next year with the North Wenatchee redevelopment. There's, I think, in this 30 million, we've got almost 5 million budgeted for North Wenatchee redevelopment, 3.5 million for LRF projects, including parking, 7 million in various street and sidewalk projects, another 7.5 million for the old station sewer expansion, a couple million for utility projects, and then a few million we have budgeted for the federal building remodel. And a lot of those either have bond proceeds backing them or other grant revenue sources. So anyway, after this, I'll be providing basically the final budget next Thursday, and then to the council, and then a week later we'll be adopting it. And so all in all, going back to the general fund, the one thing that I would note is that the general fund, both the revenues and expenses increased by about 3.9%. On the recurring revenues and recurring expenses increased by about 3.9% over the 2017 budget. So it was.
So we're still on pace for adoption in 2 weeks then?
Yep.
At our November 16th meeting? Okay.
Yep. And at the same meeting, we'll skip to the budget amendment. So towards the end of each year, we adopt a budget amendment to make sure that we have enough legal authority to spend where we're spending. All of the things you see on here have been reviewed and approved by the finance committee. Again, a couple of the things on here, I'll get some of the highlights. You see in the general fund, 3.9 million is highlighted as an appropriation amendment, and $1 million of that is related to transfers from park purchases that were done almost a year ago, and they just basically administratively need to be budgeted in our document to meet our expense appropriation requirements. There's 500,000 in items that were carried over from the 2016 budget that weren't initially included in the 2017 budget. There was 375,000 of the fire district related to their buildings. There was a $500,000 rate transfer to the rainy day fund, another $500,000 in one-time public works projects. So there were a bunch of things, and those are all one-time things in the general fund that are coming out of the fund balance, which was very healthy going into this year. It's still healthy, I should say. A few of the other things, there's the convention center, 600,000 for AV upgrades going down. LRF, we had to put in a $2 million budget amendment in there for the land under the Pybus Market that was purchased earlier this year. So those are the major. This will end up having a few more items added to it because we're analyzing all the funds and trying to figure out which ones may end up exceeding their budget. So we want to get any kind of amendments put in 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, and I think Steve Smith does a good job of reminding us that the passing of the amendment to the 2017 budget requires a majority of the councils plus one. So we'll need to make sure we have 5 votes to pass it. And I don't know who's going to be here or not here, but we're going to do that in 2 weeks. So
2 weeks.
Any other questions?
So Brad, you mentioned conservative a couple times at the beginning, and I never say words correctly. I'll start off with that. But
Me neither.
when the economy turns, not if, when the economy turns, do you feel confident with this budget that we will not have any layoffs of employees?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. We're budgeting to end up with a 20% fund balance. And
It doesn't include the $1.5 million.
And it doesn't include the $1.5 million rainy day fund. So we have probably about, we probably have close to 40% of our annual expenses sitting in our fund balance. I know when I was at the county, when we went through 2009, we ended up having to make a 10% reduction. And we were only operating at a 7% fund balance. And it gave us about a year to react to that and make those cuts. And having a 40% fund balance, if we had a downturn to the same extent as we had in 2008 or 2009, having a 40% reserve should provide us that if we were going to have to make cuts, it would allow us probably 4 years to be able to make those cuts. Probably a lot of it would be through attrition. It might scare us to see that maybe we're losing $1 million or $500,000 a year for a while, but we have a cushion to be able to make that transition slowly and easily rather than having a knee-jerk cut real hard. And hopefully we don't see something. I'm hoping, if they call it the Great Recession and comparing it to the Great Depression, I'm hoping we don't see something of that extent for another 80 years. However, I agree with you that we are probably at the top of the economy. From all the economists I've heard, it sounds like we're at the top of the bubble, and we're hoping that we continue just to stay here. There may be some roll off, but it shouldn't be as drastic as what we saw in 2008, 2009. So I am very comfortable with where our budget is at, and I think there has kind of been we've been growing really fast, and I feel like we're starting to tighten things up. I think our staffing levels are getting close to where they need to be, and I'm hoping that going forward things are just going to be status quo.
Yeah, other than utility funds, we didn't add any. Some of the utility fund workers actually work in some general fund items, so there might be a 0.3 or 0.4 additional FTV in the general fund, but for the most part, we're pretty well flat. We do have all the rainy day funds available to us. We're pushing as hard to get as much to the road fund as we can. We still have flexibility within. I think the reason we got upgraded was all the flexibility that Moody's sees in your city budget in terms of all the flexibility that we have now, the tools at our disposal. We're really in a good spot. But I agree, Mike, it's going to happen, right? We've all lived through a couple of them, right? Not a question of if, it's when. And we're doing our best. In fact, the Finance Committee this year, our policy says $1 million in the rainy day fund. But because so much of our budget is now sales tax driven, that we really thought it'd be prudent to actually put another $500,000 into the rainy day fund above what's required, just for that purpose, just because our revenue stream is now really heavily dictated by sales tax, and so that makes us a little bit more nervous. And you may see us do it again. You look at, and I'm not saying I use the library district as a place to go for how to do a budget, but they're all property tax driven, and they put a third of their money in into reserve accounts, and so it's like I think we're doing about as best as we can.
It just
So-
seems like the last couple, I've only been here a couple of years, and it just seems like it's finally, we're still not quite at 2008, and we probably never will be as far as full staff.
Right.
That it's like status, like you mentioned, status quo. We're like, this is pretty close to where we got to be. This is about it. We're finally made. 2008. This is 2017, right?
Yeah.
It took a while.
Yep.
And our roads took a beating, and we had to throw. My understanding is take money from here and there and everywhere else. So it just feels good. So it'd be nice to have this feeling, but not just overspend just because next year, one more year is good.
Yeah.
So
The one that caveat to what I just said is, and I'll be doing my staff meetings in December when we do it every 6 months with the department heads, and a little worried with all of the stuff we have going next year with the sewer and North Wenatchee Avenue and perhaps some federal building that maybe we may need a little bit of help just to get through some of the. Steve King woke up 2 different mornings this week at 3 a.m. to work on infragrant. So I told him he can't work tomorrow. So, so your staff is really starting to, and I'm just a little bit worried that we have some projects that may require at least a little bit of interim help at some point. So, but I'm meeting with them in the next couple of weeks, and we'll start looking at that, and you may get a request, maybe for some one-time. We haven't quite figured out how to make it happen yet, but there's a lot on the plate of some of your department heads.
And I think, I think the finance committee's comfortable with what they've come up with. I've only been on a few meetings, but it seems like everybody's comfortable with the direction it's going. But again, I think one of our priorities should be to continue to pay down debt when we can.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So, if we've got those kind of reserves, maybe that ought to be a consideration for 2018.
So,
if we
yeah,
can make
and
it
you
sure.
you look at our debt, you got police debt that's voted on, so I don't really look at that.
It's still a burden.
Yes, the Lodging Tax Committee has committed to a program that I think you'll see pretty soon that puts your convention debt on a five-year payout when it's a 10-year bond, because we were worried about that.
good.
So we're not out of debt, and we're probably never going to be out of debt with sewer and water, those sorts of things. But I think that the one I'm really concerned about is the convention center, because it's going to need another upgrade in 5 more years that we get that. So the LTAC's been great working with us and trying to make sure that we're really funneling to pound that one down. So I feel good about kind of where that's at.
LTAC still doing good with that?
Yeah, I think we'll.
LTAC has done a really great job.
Yeah, so I think basically what you're going to see is convention center and the chamber contract, which I think we've seen versions of it today. It's probably pretty close to final. You'll see it. I don't know if it's next week or the week after, but.
You'll see it in December. It goes to LTAC November 15th.
Okay, then we'll see it. Okay, so it's working its way up to us. So I think we're cognizant of the debt factor and the ones that we really feel like we need to get under control, so that the next time the convention center needs money, that it's there. And again, the voter stuff, I think you just kind of stick with that. And we're done with the public works building, which was long before you were around. And so there's really, for a city our size, there's not a significant amount of debt. It's mostly utility debt here.
It's a good thing.
Yep. All right.
Thank you.
Brad.
Thank you very much, Brad, and thank you for your explanation.
Oh, yeah.
Very helpful.
No problem. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, mayor's report. So I think they clicked the button today and the infogrant went off to Washington, D.C. I got actually a written version of it. I was actually out of town this week, and I think that worked to their advantage because I didn't have to bother them and they didn't have to bother me, and I think it was in for all week. So I told Steve King he can't work tomorrow. He says he wants to work in the morning, get the afternoon off, but he needs a break. So we'll see. I don't know what the next step is with that, Steve. You going to hear anything back in the next month or two?
No, it'll probably be 6 months before we hear anything from USDOT, and I think the next step is to start thinking about the political side of it.
Okay. So
Excuse me, Steve, to hear, well, what?
He said the political side.
Oh, okay.
But Jeannie will tell us when and if and how and that sort of stuff. Okay. And then, of course, we're meeting next week on Thursday, and then the following week, and then we get a couple of weeks off, and then I think we're still scheduled for one meeting in December.
Right.
But plan on bringing your jammies. We may be here a while.
Each of the next 2 meetings has a work session item on them. So we've got a lot of business for the end of the year. So
It's normal.
All right, anything on the council stuff that you guys have been working on?
Just the IRA Summit is next Wednesday
Okay.
in Chelan.
Fishland, okay.
Yeah. And North Central Washington Economic Development District is the sponsor of it.
Okay, good.
So I'll be going to that.
Okay.
Link Board, we're having a special meeting on the 13th of November to
Okay.
talk about the raising the sales tax, so
Okay.
on the ballot.
At some point. Okay.
We'll see what that conversation, how that conversation
How that
goes.
goes.
Solid waste is entering some interesting times because the market for recycled goods is plummeting. There's just not a lot of market for it anymore.
Really?
Glass has been going at a loss for quite some time, and now because so many people are recycling, the market has just been flooded.
Oh,
And,
okay.
so things are not all that rosy for recycling. But we
And so they must
continue to-
budget the revenue for the recycling and they're not getting it
They're not
because the
getting it.
prices are down? I do want to report, I actually made it through the waste management thing the other day perfectly, really well. Yeah. For those on Public Works, they know what I'm talking about.
Didn't
All right.
dump on anybody.
What? No, it all worked perfect. I went in the only thing is I went in the exit and went out the entrance. Other than that, I did pretty well. But. All right, anything else for the good of the order?
You just remember our November 30 session with the Downtown Association
Yep,
Board,
that's on my
Oh, yes.
calendar.
Right?
Yeah.
wherever
What
that's
night
going
is
to be.
that?
It's a Thursday.
Yeah, they scheduled it purposely on a Thursday where we don't meet, so,
And they've invited spouses.
They have.
yeah.
Yep. Should be on your iPad.
we also
Leave them at home if you want.
And I did get an email from Linda Haglund today, and I know the WDA is kind of working with us on a plan for maintenance of the downtown plants and some of that sort of thing, so we'll see if we can get some sort of something to the finish line between. I told her that if we're gonna have something, we're gonna have to have a contract, and our last meeting's December 7th, so if we're gonna do something,
That'll be by then.
let's try to get her done by then, so we'll see. Not sure what they're working on and whether we're gonna get to the finish line on that or not.
There is another parking committee, parking study committee meeting.
Parking committee's
On
meeting
the
next
8th.
week?
It's on the 8th, and I was on that committee. I can't be there because I have to be in a work
It's on
event.
it's on my calendar.
Okay,
I think I'm going to make that one.
good.
we are joining the directors' meetings November and December, so we're doing it on November 30th at lunchtime.
Okay.
So just for those council members who like to attend directors.
Providing a lunch.
All right,
Yeah.
that's really all I got, so we're adjourned.
All right.